Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Damon Barlow stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a chessboard. At 42, he commanded respect in every room he entered. His construction empire, Barlow Industries, had built half the skyline he now surveyed. Success hadn't come easy. It was carved from determination, calculated risks, and an unwavering principle. Loyalty was everything, and betrayal was unforgivable. 16 years ago, he'd married Vivian Gates at the height of his company's expansion. She was 26 then, beautiful and ambitious, working as a marketing coordinator for a rival firm. Their courtship was a whirlwind of corporate events and stolen moments between board meetings. Vivian understood his drive because she shared it, or so he believed. The early years were golden. Vivian transitioned from her career to managing their social life, and later their home when their son Mitchell was born 14 years ago. Then came their daughter Elena, now 12. Damon provided everything. The mansion in Hillcrest Estates, private schools, European vacations, and a lifestyle most could only dream of. But success bred complacency, and Damon had been traveling more frequently, closing deals across 3 states. He trusted Vivian implicitly. She managed their household, their children's schedules, and the charitable foundation they'd established together. Trust, he would soon learn, was a luxury he could no longer afford. Dr. Gerald Hansen entered their lives 2 years ago when Elena developed anxiety issues. The family therapist came highly recommended, with degrees from prestigious universities and a practice that catered to affluent families. At 38, Gerald was charming, well-spoken, and seemingly devoted to helping families communicate better. The therapy sessions started as family meetings, then shifted to individual sessions for Elena, and eventually included couples counseling when Damon and Vivian began experiencing tension over his travel schedule. Gerald was professional, insightful, and gradually became someone Vivian confided in about everything. Her feelings of loneliness, her concerns about Damon's absence, her fears about their marriage growing distant. What Damon didn't know was that Gerald's interest in their family dynamics went far beyond professional boundaries. The doctor had studied Damon's success, his habits, his weaknesses. Gerald wasn't just treating the Barlow family. He was infiltrating it methodically and deliberately. The first red flag should have been Vivian's sudden interest in individual growth. She started attending weekend workshops that Gerald recommended, reading books he suggested, and spending long hours discussing her emotional journey with him during extended therapy sessions. Damon, consumed with a major project in Phoenix, dismissed these changes as positive steps towards self-improvement. The second red flag was Mitchell's behavior. Their 14-year-old son, once eager to share his day with his father, became withdrawn and hostile. When Damon tried to engage him in conversation, Mitchell would retreat to his room or seek out his mother. Elena, meanwhile, seemed to worship Gerald, constantly quoting his advice and asking when she'd see Dr. Gerald again. Damon's instincts, honed by years of reading people in business negotiations, whispered warnings he chose to ignore. He loved his family and trusted them completely. That trust would prove to be his greatest vulnerability. The house felt different when he returned from trips. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Vivian's phone buzzed constantly with messages she quickly dismissed as foundation business or scheduling for the kids. The intimacy they'd shared for 16 years grew cold, replaced by perfunctory kisses and conversations about logistics. But Damon was a man who built his empire by paying attention to details others missed. When the foundation received an unexpectedly large donation from an anonymous source, exactly the amount Gerald charged for his premium therapy packages, Damon's suspicions crystallized into certainty. The truth, when it finally surfaced, would shatter everything he'd built and believed in. More importantly, it would awaken something dark and calculating in Damon Barlow that had been dormant for years, a side of him that his enemies in business had feared, but his family had never seen. Chapter 2. cracks in the foundation. 3 months before the baby incident that would change everything, Damon began his investigation. Unlike the emotional confrontations that destroyed most marriages, Damon approached his wife's betrayal like a business acquisition, methodically gathering intelligence before making his move. He hired Marcus Reed, a former FBI agent turned private investigator who specialized in discreet domestic surveillance. Marcus's reports arrived weekly, each one adding another piece to a puzzle that revealed the depth of Vivian and Gerald's deception. The affair had been ongoing for 8 months. They met at Gerald's office after hours, at upscale hotels during Damon's business trips, and even in Damon's own home when he was away. The surveillance photos were clinical in their clarity. Vivian entering Gerald's office building at 9 p.m., leaving at midnight. Gerald's Mercedes parked 3 blocks from the Barlow residence on afternoons when Damon was supposedly in meetings across town. But the betrayal ran deeper than adultery. Gerald had been systematically poisoning Damon's children against him. During their individual sessions, he planted seeds of doubt about their father's love, his priorities, his commitment to the family. He positioned himself as the understanding male figure who truly cared about their emotional well-being, while painting Damon as distant and work-obsessed. Mitchell's hostility now made perfect sense. Gerald had convinced the 14-year-old that his father's frequent travel meant he cared more about money than family. Elena's hero worship of Gerald was equally orchestrated. The doctor had made himself indispensable to her emotional stability, creating a dependency that served his agenda. The most damning evidence came from Gerald's own digital communications. The man was meticulous about his professional life, but careless with his personal devices. Marcus's technical specialist uncovered text message exchanges between Gerald and Vivian that revealed their long-term plans. They intended to wait until Elena turned 18. Then Vivian would file for divorce, claiming Damon's workaholism and emotional absence had destroyed their marriage. Gerald would testify as her therapist about the psychological damage done to the family. With Damon's substantial assets and Gerald's professional testimony, Vivian expected to receive primary custody of the children and a settlement that would set them up for life. Gerald's practice would benefit from the high-profile case, establishing him as an expert in wealthy family dynamics. They'd even discussed moving to California together once the divorce was finalized. Reading those messages in his study late one night, Damon felt something cold and predatory awaken inside him. These people weren't just betraying him. They were stealing his children's love, manipulating his family's emotions, and planning to financially destroy him in the process. They turned his own trust and generosity into weapons against him. But Damon was a man who'd built an empire by thinking 10 moves ahead of his competitors. If Vivian and Gerald wanted to play a long game, he'd show them what a true strategist could accomplish. The irony wasn't lost on him that Vivian was now 3 months pregnant with what would be their 3rd child. She'd announced the pregnancy with apparent joy, though Damon noticed Gerald's increased attention during that period. The timing raised questions that DNA testing would eventually answer. But for now, Damon played the excited, expectant father while planning his retribution. He began establishing his own narrative. Where Vivian sought distant workaholism, Damon would demonstrate devoted family commitment. He reduced his travel schedule, attended Elena's soccer games, helped Mitchell with his homework, and showered Vivian with attention and gifts. To outside observers, the Barlows appeared to be a family strengthened by their upcoming addition. Meanwhile, Damon quietly restructured his assets, moving money through legitimate business transactions into accounts and investments that would be difficult to trace or claim in a divorce proceeding. He documented every instance of Gerald's boundary violations, every inappropriate communication, every ethical breach that could destroy the doctor's career and credibility. The pregnancy progressed normally. Vivian glowed with what everyone assumed was maternal happiness, though Damon suspected much of her joy came from secret communications with Gerald about their future together. The doctor had even begun subtly preparing Mitchell and Elena for their parents' eventual separation, framing it as a positive change that would make everyone happier. But as Vivian entered her 3rd trimester, Damon made a discovery that shifted his plans from financial and emotional warfare to something far more personal and devastating. The truth would surface in a hospital room 3 days after their baby's birth, captured on security footage that would reveal the true depths of the betrayal surrounding his family. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Little Dominic Barlow entered the world on a snowy February morning, 8 pounds and 2 ounces of apparent perfection. Damon held his son for the first time in the delivery room, studying the infant's features with the careful attention he'd learned to apply to every important detail in his life. Something about the baby's facial structure nagged at him, but newborns often look different than they would in a few months. Vivian recovered well from the delivery, accepting congratulations from friends and family who visited the private maternity suite. Gerald made an appearance under the guise of checking on the family's emotional adjustment to their new addition. He spent 20 minutes discussing the importance of family bonding and the psychological impact of a new sibling on Mitchell and Elena. Damon watched the interaction carefully, noting how Gerald's eyes lingered on the baby with an intensity that seemed unprofessional. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. Damon split his time between the hospital and home, ensuring Mitchell and Elena felt included in welcoming their new brother. He noticed their reactions were subdued, polite, but not enthusiastic. When he questioned them about their feelings, both children gave responses that sounded rehearsed, as if they'd been coached on appropriate reactions. On the 3rd day, Damon stepped out of Vivian's room to take a business call from his Phoenix project manager. The conversation lasted 40 minutes as they discussed a setback that required his immediate attention. When he returned to the room, chaos erupted. Vivian was screaming. Nurses rushed past him toward the nursery. The heart monitor attached to baby Dominic was flatlined. Within seconds, the room filled with medical personnel performing CPR on the 3-day-old infant. Damon watched in horror as doctors worked frantically to restart his son's heart, pumping the tiny chest with careful precision while Vivian sobbed uncontrollably. After 23 minutes that felt like hours, Dominic's heart began beating again. The baby was rushed to the NICU, connected to monitors and breathing apparatus. Doctors explained that they'd caught the cardiac arrest quickly enough to prevent brain damage, but they couldn't explain what had caused an apparently healthy newborn to go into cardiac arrest without warning. While Vivian remained in the maternity ward under sedation, Damon kept vigil beside Dominic's incubator. The baby's vital signs stabilized, and doctors grew cautiously optimistic about his recovery. But the mystery of what had triggered the cardiac arrest remained unsolved. 2 hours later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of hospital security, approached Damon in the family conference room. Her expression was grave as she gestured toward a laptop computer. "Sir, please look at the nursery's security footage," she said quietly. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. The nursery was dimly lit, with only 2 nurses on duty at the station 30 feet from the infant's cribs. A figure in scrubs and a surgical cap moved purposefully toward Dominic's bassinet, checking over their shoulder to ensure the nurses remained focused on their paperwork. Damon watched the figure lean over his son's crib, seeming to adjust something near the baby's head. The person's movements were deliberate and practiced, not the gentle checking of a concerned medical professional. After 90 seconds, the figure straightened up and walked calmly toward the nursery exit. "Can you enhance the image when they turn toward the camera?" Damon asked, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Dr. Mitchell clicked several keys, zooming in and adjusting the contrast. As the figure passed under the security light near the door, they turned slightly and the camera captured their profile. Gerald Hansen's face filled the screen. Damon's vision blurred as the full implications crashed over him. Gerald hadn't just been sleeping with his wife and manipulating his children. He'd attempted to murder his newborn son. The cardiac arrest wasn't a medical mystery. It was attempted infanticide committed by a man who saw the baby as an obstacle to his plans with Vivian. When Damon saw Gerald's face clearly on that security footage, his legs gave out and he collapsed into the chair behind him. But it wasn't from shock or grief. It was from the overwhelming rush of pure, calculated fury that flooded his system. Every instinct he'd developed in business, every ruthless decision he'd made to build his empire, every dark capability he'd kept carefully controlled suddenly focused on a single objective. Gerald Hansen had tried to kill his child. And for that, both Gerald and Vivian would pay a price that would make their current betrayal seem like a minor inconvenience. The hospital security footage was damning, but Damon's mind was already working beyond the immediate legal implications. The police would arrest Gerald, certainly, but the justice system was slow and imperfect. Gerald might claim mental illness, accept a plea bargain, or serve a reduced sentence. Vivian might deny knowledge of the attempt, claiming she was an innocent victim of Gerald's obsession. That wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. As Damon sat in that conference room, watching the security footage replay Gerald's attempted murder of his infant son, he made a decision that would determine the fate of everyone who had betrayed him. The legal system would handle Gerald's crime, but Damon Barlow would handle something far more comprehensive: complete and total destruction of everything Gerald and Vivian valued, loved, or hoped to achieve. They'd made the mistake of assuming he was just a wealthy businessman who'd roll over when confronted with divorce papers and custody battles. They were about to learn that beneath his civilized exterior lived something far more dangerous than they'd imagined. Chapter 4. The Investigation. The police arrested Gerald Hansen 6 hours after Damon provided the security footage. Detective Raymond Jones led the investigation, treating the case as attempted murder against an infant. Gerald's initial denials crumbled when presented with the video evidence, but his explanation was carefully crafted. "I was checking on the baby because Vivian called me, concerned about his breathing," Gerald claimed during interrogation. "I'm a trained professional with experience in infant psychology. I was trying to help." It was a lie designed to create reasonable doubt, but Damon knew the truth ran deeper. While the police focused on building their criminal case, Damon launched his own investigation into Gerald's background, financial situation, and professional history. Marcus Reed's expanded investigation revealed disturbing patterns in Gerald's past. 3 previous clients had filed ethics complaints against him for boundary violations, though none had been substantiated due to insufficient evidence. 2 wealthy female clients had divorced their husbands shortly after beginning therapy with Gerald, and both had later married men who bore striking resemblances to the doctor. More damning was Gerald's financial situation. Despite his successful practice and high fees, Gerald was drowning in debt. He made several disastrous investments in cryptocurrency and day trading, losing nearly $200,000 in the past year. His medical malpractice insurance had lapsed, his office lease was 3 months behind, and he owed significant money to several high-end creditors. The timeline became clear. Gerald had targeted the Barlow family not just for Vivian's beauty and availability, but for Damon's wealth. The affair was a calculated business decision designed to secure Gerald's financial future through Vivian's eventual divorce settlement. But the baby changed everything. If Dominic was Damon's biological son, Vivian's divorce settlement would be reduced by the presence of a 3rd child and the additional financial obligations. Worse, if the baby's paternity was questioned and proved to be Gerald's, the entire plan would collapse under the weight of scandal and malpractice suits. DNA testing confirmed Damon's suspicions. Dominic was Gerald's biological son, not Damon's. The affair had produced a child that threatened to expose everything, so Gerald had decided to eliminate the evidence permanently. While Gerald sat in county jail awaiting trial, Vivian played the role of traumatized victim. She visited him daily, professing her love and planning his defense strategy. She hired Clayton Marsh, the city's most expensive criminal defense attorney, using money from accounts she'd slowly been draining during the affair. Vivian's performance was masterful. She presented herself as a confused woman who'd been manipulated by an unethical therapist. She claimed Gerald had taken advantage of her emotional vulnerability during Damon's frequent absences, gradually breaking down her psychological defenses until she'd lost the ability to think clearly. To the outside world, she appeared to be the secondary victim of Gerald's crimes. Friends and family rallied around her, offering support during her traumatic realization that her therapist had been manipulating her family for months. Even Mitchell and Elena seemed to buy into their mother's victim narrative, angry at Gerald for tricking them about their father's love. But Damon saw through the performance. Marcus's surveillance revealed that Vivian was still communicating with Gerald through a complex system involving his defense attorney. She was actively helping to coordinate his defense strategy while maintaining her public facade of betrayed innocence. The criminal case proceeded slowly. Gerald's trial was scheduled for 8 months away, giving Damon time to implement a more comprehensive form of justice. He realized that sending Gerald to prison, while satisfying, wasn't enough. Gerald would serve his time, possibly get early release, and eventually rebuild his life. Vivian would divorce Damon, take half his assets, and start fresh with someone new. That scenario was unacceptable. During this period, Damon made another discovery that changed his entire approach to revenge. While reviewing Gerald's professional files that had been subpoenaed for the trial, he found detailed psychological profiles Gerald had compiled on Damon's family. The documents revealed that Gerald had been studying them for over a year before the affair began, identifying weaknesses and pressure points he could exploit. Gerald had targeted Elena's anxiety issues, deliberately exacerbating them to create dependency on his therapy. He'd manipulated Mitchell's normal teenage rebellion, channeling it into resentment against Damon. He'd studied Vivian's personality, her needs, her fears, and had crafted a seduction strategy as methodical as any business plan. Reading those clinical assessments of his family's psychological vulnerabilities, Damon felt the last vestiges of mercy drain from his soul. Gerald hadn't just betrayed their trust. He'd weaponized their emotions and used his professional training to systematically destroy their family from within. If Gerald wanted to play psychological warfare, Damon would show him what real psychological destruction looked like. Chapter 5. Laying the Trap. While Gerald remained in jail and Vivian maintained her victim act, Damon began implementing a plan that would destroy both of them completely. The legal system would handle Gerald's attempted murder charge, but Damon's justice would be far more comprehensive and permanent. First, he addressed his children. Mitchell and Elena had been psychologically manipulated for months, their relationships with their father damaged by Gerald's systematic campaign of alienation. Rather than confront them with the truth immediately, Damon employed a family therapist of his own, Dr. Joyce Atkins, a renowned specialist in cult deprogramming and psychological manipulation recovery. Dr. Atkins worked carefully to undo Gerald's conditioning without traumatizing the children further. Through guided conversations and therapeutic techniques, she helped Mitchell and Elena recognize how their thoughts and feelings about their father had been artificially influenced. The process was slow and painful, but gradually both children began to remember their father's love and question the negative narrative Gerald had planted in their minds. Mitchell's breakthrough came first. During a session with Dr. Atkins, he broke down crying as he realized how Gerald had twisted his normal teenage frustrations into hatred for his father. "He made me feel like Dad didn't love me," Mitchell sobbed. "But Dad was always there for the important stuff. Gerald he made me focus on the wrong things." Elena's recovery was more complex due to her younger age and deeper emotional dependency on Gerald. But as she worked through her feelings with Dr. Atkins, she began to understand that the doctor had made her anxiety worse, not better, creating problems he could then solve to make himself seem indispensable. With his children's healing underway, Damon turned his attention to Gerald's complete destruction. The attempted murder charge would likely result in a 10 to 15-year prison sentence, but Damon wanted to ensure Gerald emerged from prison with absolutely nothing to return to. Using his business connections and financial resources, Damon systematically dismantled Gerald's life. He purchased Gerald's outstanding debts at significant discounts, then called them in simultaneously, forcing Gerald into bankruptcy even before his trial began. He arranged for Gerald's professional license to be permanently revoked through formal ethics complaints supported by newly discovered evidence of his pattern of client manipulation. But Damon's most elegant destruction involved Gerald's family. The doctor had parents in their 70s who lived comfortably on their retirement savings and the small monthly assistance Gerald had been providing. Gerald also had a younger sister, Janet Hansen, who worked as a nurse and had always looked up to her brother as the family success story. Damon approached them as a concerned victim, seeking to understand Gerald's psychological profile for the criminal trial. He presented himself as a man trying to comprehend how a trusted family therapist could attempt to murder an infant. Gerald's parents were devastated to learn about their son's crimes, but they still believed he might be mentally ill rather than genuinely evil. That changed when Damon provided them with evidence of Gerald's calculated seduction of multiple wealthy clients over the years. Gerald wasn't sick. He was a predator who used his professional credentials to exploit vulnerable families. The revelation destroyed his parents' faith in him completely. They publicly disowned him, refusing to attend his trial or provide character testimony for his defense. Janet's reaction was even more devastating to Gerald. As a medical professional herself, she understood the ethical violations Gerald had committed. When she learned that her brother had deliberately exacerbated a child's anxiety disorder for his own purposes, she filed formal complaints with every medical board and professional organization Gerald had ever been associated with. More importantly, Janet began reaching out to Gerald's former clients, helping them understand that their family problems might have been artificially created or worsened by Gerald's manipulations. Several families filed civil lawsuits against Gerald, seeking damages for the psychological harm he'd caused their children. By the time Gerald's criminal trial began, he faced not only the attempted murder charge, but also multiple civil suits, complete professional ruin, and total rejection by his family. His defense attorney, Clayton Marsh, advised him to accept a plea bargain, but Gerald's narcissism wouldn't allow him to admit guilt. Meanwhile, Vivian continued her performance as the manipulated victim, but Damon had been carefully documenting her ongoing communications with Gerald and her efforts to help his defense. When the time was right, he would expose her true role in Gerald's schemes. The trap was nearly complete. Gerald would lose everything: his freedom, his career, his family, his future. But for Vivian, Damon had something special planned. She'd betrayed him, manipulated their children, and participated in a plan that ultimately led to an attempt on their baby's life. For that, her punishment would be uniquely devastating and permanently public. Chapter 6: The Revelation. Gerald's trial began on a crisp October morning, 8 months after his arrest. The courthouse was packed with media, drawn by the sensational nature of the case. A respected family therapist accused of attempting to murder an infant patient. Clayton Marsh had built Gerald's defense around a claim of diminished capacity, arguing that financial stress and a psychological breakdown had caused his client to act irrationally. Damon attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row where Gerald could see him. Vivian sat beside him, playing the supportive wife standing by her husband during their family's darkest hour. To observers, they appear to be presenting a united front despite the betrayal that had torn their family apart. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Security footage showed Gerald entering the nursery and tampering with baby Dominic's breathing apparatus, leading directly to the cardiac arrest. Medical experts testified that the baby's airway had been deliberately obstructed, and that only the quick response of hospital staff had prevented his death. Gerald's defense claimed he had been trying to help the baby, not harm him. They painted him as a dedicated professional who had become emotionally invested in the Barlow family's welfare. Clayton Marsh argued that Gerald's actions, while inappropriate, were motivated by concern rather than malice. The defense strategy might have worked if not for the evidence Damon had been carefully preparing. On the trial's 4th day, the prosecution called an unexpected witness, Dr. Eric Charles, a forensic psychiatrist who had been analyzing Gerald's professional files and personal communications. Dr. Charles presented a devastating psychological profile of Gerald as a calculating predator who had systematically targeted wealthy families for financial exploitation. The affair with Vivian wasn't a crime of passion, but a calculated business decision. The attempt on Dominic's life wasn't a moment of psychological breakdown, but a cold-blooded effort to eliminate evidence that could expose his schemes. But the trial's most damaging moment came when the prosecution presented Gerald's private journal, discovered during a search of his home. The journal detailed his manipulation strategies, his financial motivations, and his growing frustration with Vivian's pregnancy. One entry, dated 2 weeks before Dominic's birth, was particularly damning. The baby complicates everything. If V divorces D while pregnant with my child, the paternity will be obvious and my career is finished. If the baby dies of SIDS or some medical complication, V can grieve appropriately and proceed with divorce as planned. Natural infant mortality occurs in 6 per 1,000 births. Respiratory distress is common and rarely investigated thoroughly. The journal entry revealed premeditation, planning, and a chilling calculation about murdering an infant to protect his financial schemes. Gerald's claim of diminished capacity crumbled in the face of such clear evidence of deliberate planning. During cross-examination, Gerald finally revealed his true nature. Under pressure from the prosecutor's questions, his calm facade cracked, and he began ranting about how Damon didn't deserve his family or wealth. He claimed Vivian had been wasted on a man who cared more about business than relationships, and that he could have given her the emotional connection she needed. The outburst confirmed what Damon had suspected. Gerald's motivations went beyond money. He genuinely believed he was entitled to Damon's life, his wife, his success. The attempted murder wasn't just about eliminating evidence. It was about clearing the path to claim what he thought should be his. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Gerald was convicted of attempted murder, child endangerment, and professional misconduct. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole for the first 15 years. As Gerald was led away in shackles, he turned toward the gallery where Damon sat. Instead of remorse or defeat, Gerald's expression showed pure hatred. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. "You can't watch her forever." That threat sealed Vivian's fate. Damon had been considering showing her mercy, possibly offering a quiet divorce with minimal financial consequences if she agreed to supervised visitation with the children. But Gerald's words revealed that Vivian remained loyal to him, that she would likely attempt to help him even from prison. Outside the courthouse, Vivian played her role perfectly for the assembled media. She spoke about forgiveness, about the importance of mental health treatment, and about her family's commitment to healing from the trauma Gerald had caused them. But Damon knew the truth. Marcus's surveillance had confirmed that Vivian had been funneling money to Gerald's commissary account, communicating with him through coded messages and letters supposedly meant for his lawyer, and even discussing plans for his eventual appeal. The criminal trial was over, but Damon's justice was just beginning. Gerald would spend the next 15 years in prison, but when he emerged, he would find that Damon's revenge had only grown more sophisticated and devastating with time. And for Vivian, who had orchestrated this betrayal from the beginning and remained committed to Gerald even after his attempted murder of their child, Damon had prepared a revelation that would destroy her reputation, her relationships, and her future completely. Chapter 7. The Setup. 6 months after Gerald's conviction, life at the Barlow mansion had settled into a deceptive normalcy. Vivian continued her performance as the repentant wife grateful for her family's forgiveness, while Damon played the role of a husband committed to rebuilding their marriage. To their children and the outside world, the Barlows appeared to be healing from their ordeal stronger than ever. Mitchell and Elena, now fully recovered from Gerald's psychological manipulation through Dr. Atkins' therapy, had rekindled their relationships with their father. Mitchell, now 15, spent his afternoons working alongside Damon at various construction sites, learning the business that would someday be his inheritance. Elena, 13, had returned to her previous confidence and achievement in school, her anxiety issues resolved once Gerald's artificial amplification was removed. Baby Dominic, now 8 months old, thrived despite his traumatic start. DNA testing had confirmed Gerald's paternity, but Damon raised the boy as his own son, never treating him differently than Mitchell and Elena. In public and private, Damon was the perfect father figure, though he maintained careful emotional distance from a child who would never truly be his. Vivian interpreted Damon's apparent acceptance of the situation as forgiveness, perhaps even weakness. She began testing boundaries, staying out late for charity meetings, taking mysterious phone calls she claimed were from attorneys handling civil suits against Gerald, and showing subtle signs of her old entitlement and manipulation. What Vivian didn't know was that Damon had spent the past 6 months creating an elaborate trap designed to expose her true nature to everyone who mattered. Every friend, family member, business associate, and social connection would witness her complete moral collapse in a setting that would make denial impossible. The plan centered around the Barlow Foundation's annual charity gala, traditionally held at the Grand Ballroom of the Hilton downtown. This year's event would honor families affected by medical malpractice, with proceeds supporting victims of professional misconduct. The irony wasn't lost on Damon that Vivian would be hosting an event condemning exactly the type of behavior she'd enabled and supported. Damon spent months planning every detail. The guest list included 400 of the city's most influential residents, politicians, business leaders, medical professionals, and social figures whose opinions shaped public discourse. Also invited were several of Gerald's former clients who had suffered from his manipulations, Dr. Joyce Adkins, who had treated the Barlow children, and Detective Raymond Jones, who had investigated Gerald's crimes. The evening's program would include testimonials from families victimized by professional misconduct, presentations by experts on psychological manipulation, and a special tribute to children who had survived attempts on their lives by trusted caregivers. Every element was designed to create a context that would make Vivian's betrayal seem particularly heinous. But the centerpiece of Damon's plan was a multimedia presentation he'd been preparing for months. Working with a professional documentary team, he'd compiled a comprehensive record of Vivian's affair, her financial manipulations, her ongoing support for Gerald even after his conviction, and her role in facilitating the attempted murder of their infant son. The presentation included audio recordings of Vivian's phone conversations with Gerald's legal team, video surveillance of her meeting with Gerald associates to coordinate support for his appeal, and financial records showing how she'd systematically stolen money from their joint accounts to fund Gerald's defense and commissary account. Most damning were the love letters Vivian had written to Gerald while he awaited trial, expressing her continued devotion and promising to wait for his release. In one particularly revealing letter, she wrote, "What happened to the baby was unfortunate, but I understand you were protecting our future together. 20 years isn't forever, and I'll make sure you have something to come home to." The letter proved that Vivian not only knew about Gerald's premeditation, but supported his decision to attempt murder as a means of protecting their relationship. Damon had also arranged for special guests who would amplify the evening's impact. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital security chief who had discovered Gerald's crime, would present findings about how often trusted medical professionals violated their positions to harm patients. Representatives from the state medical board would discuss new protocols for identifying predatory behavior among therapists and doctors. The evening would begin with cocktails and silent auction bidding, followed by dinner and the formal program. Damon's presentation would be introduced as a special segment honoring families who had survived betrayal by trusted professionals. By the time the audience realized they were watching Vivian's exposure in real time, it would be too late for her to escape or minimize the damage. Every major local media outlet would be present, ostensibly to cover the charity event, but actually positioned to document Vivian's public destruction. The story would dominate local news for weeks, ensuring that her reputation would be permanently destroyed throughout their social and professional circles. But Damon's plan extended beyond public humiliation. Legal documents had been prepared to file for divorce immediately after the gala, citing adultery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Vivian would be presented with papers that would strip her of custody rights, financial claims, and even access to their shared residences. The trap was set. In 48 hours, at the charity gala she believed would rehabilitate her public image, Vivian would face complete and total destruction of everything she'd built through 16 years of marriage. Chapter 8. The Execution. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and gold accents as 400 guests arrived for the Barlow Foundation's annual charity gala. Vivian moved through the crowd like a gracious hostess, accepting compliments on her resilience and strength during her family's difficult year. She wore a stunning midnight blue gown that Damon had specially commissioned, unaware that it would be the last expensive item he would ever purchase for her. Damon watched his wife work the room, noting how easily she slipped into her role as the perfect society wife. She spoke passionately about supporting victims of professional misconduct, her voice carrying just the right note of personal experience without seeming self-pitying. Several guests commented to Damon about how fortunate he was to have such a strong, forgiving woman by his side. "She's truly remarkable," Senator William Hayes told Damon during cocktails. "To forgive and move forward after what that doctor did to your family takes extraordinary character." Damon smiled and nodded appropriately, knowing that in less than 2 hours, Senator Hayes would understand exactly what kind of character Vivian actually possessed. The evening proceeded flawlessly through cocktails and dinner. The silent auction raised over $200,000 for victim support services. Guest speakers included Dr. Joyce Adkins discussing the psychological recovery process for families affected by professional misconduct, and Detective Raymond Jones outlining how law enforcement identifies and prosecutes trusted individuals who abuse their positions. Each presentation built toward the emotional crescendo that would make Vivian's exposure even more devastating. The audience was primed to feel outrage toward anyone who would exploit professional trust or endanger children. At 9:47 p.m., Damon approached the podium to introduce the evening's special presentation. The lights dimmed as he began speaking. "Tonight, we've heard from experts about how predators exploit professional relationships to harm the families who trust them," Damon began, his voice steady and authoritative. "But understanding this evil requires more than academic discussion. It requires examining real cases, real victims, and real consequences." The large screens flanking the stage displayed the Barlow Foundation logo as Damon continued. "What you're about to see is a comprehensive examination of how one family, my family, was systematically destroyed by individuals who violated every principle of professional ethics and human decency. This presentation contains disturbing content, but truth often disturbs us. And tonight, truth serves justice." Vivian, seated at the head table, smiled proudly as the audience prepared to watch what she assumed would be a tasteful documentary about their family's recovery from Gerald's crimes. She had no idea that Marcus Reed's investigation team had spent months preparing a minute-by-minute chronicle of her betrayal. The presentation began with Gerald's first appointment with the Barlow family, showing how he had studied their vulnerabilities and crafted a manipulation strategy. Hidden cameras Marcus had installed months earlier revealed Gerald's true behavior during therapy sessions, cold calculation masked by professional concern. But the audience's shocked murmurs turned to gasps when the presentation shifted to Vivian's role in the conspiracy. Audio recordings revealed her discussions with Gerald about Damon's travel schedule, their children's emotional needs, and their marriage's weaknesses. Far from being Gerald's victim, Vivian was clearly his partner and collaborator. Vivian's face went white as her own voice filled the ballroom, recorded during conversation with Gerald 3 weeks before Dominic's birth. "Damon's in Phoenix until Friday. The baby's due next week, and after that, we can start planning our exit strategy. I've been documenting his emotional absence for months. Dr. Adkins will testify that his workaholism damaged the children's psychological development." The presentation continued with surveillance footage of Vivian meeting with Gerald's associates during his trial, providing them with money and information to support his defense. Bank records showed systematic theft from family accounts to fund Gerald's legal expenses and commissary funds. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. The screens displayed Vivian's love letters to Gerald, written after his conviction and sentencing. Her own handwriting condemned her completely. My darling Gerald, I know what you did to protect our future, and I love you more for having the courage to take action. Damon will never understand what we have together. 20 years will pass quickly, and I'll make sure you have a family and a life to return to. Our love is worth any sacrifice. 400 guests sat in stunned silence as they realized they were witnessing Vivian's complete exposure in real time. She had not only enabled Gerald's attempted murder of an infant, but had praised him for it, promising to wait for his release from prison. The presentation concluded with audio from Gerald's private phone calls from prison, recorded legally under the prison system's monitoring policies. In these conversations, Gerald and Vivian discussed plans for his appeal, strategies for rebuilding their lives together after his release, and Vivian's ongoing manipulation of Damon's forgiveness. As the lights came up, Damon returned to the podium while Vivian sat frozen in her chair, unable to speak or move. 400 pairs of eyes focused on her with expressions of disgust, horror, and betrayal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damon said quietly, "you have just witnessed what true professional misconduct looks like. Not just from Dr. Gerald Hansen, who attempted to murder my infant son, but from my wife, who enabled his crimes and continues to support him today." Two law enforcement officers, invited guests who had been briefed earlier, approached Vivian's table with arrest warrants. She was being charged as an accessory after the fact to attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The charges wouldn't result in significant prison time, but they would ensure her complete social and legal destruction. As Vivian was escorted from the ballroom in handcuffs, the 400 guests, politicians, business leaders, socialites, and media representatives bore witness to the most complete public downfall they had ever seen. Her reputation was destroyed not just with rumors or allegations, but with undeniable evidence presented in front of everyone who mattered in their community. The story would dominate news cycles for weeks. Vivian's supporters would abandon her, her social connections would evaporate, and her future would be permanently scarred by the public record of her betrayal and moral corruption. But for Damon, the evening's success was just the beginning of a more comprehensive destruction that would follow Vivian for the rest of her life. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. 3 weeks after the gala, Vivian sat in a sparse apartment across town, her fall from grace complete and irreversible. The luxury of the Hillcrest mansion had been replaced by a 2-bedroom rental in a middle-class neighborhood, paid for by the minimal allowance Damon provided through court-ordered temporary support. The criminal charges against her had been resolved through a plea bargain that resulted in 2 years probation, community service, and a felony record that would follow her forever. But the legal consequences were insignificant compared to the social and financial destruction Damon had orchestrated. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly once Vivian's betrayal became public knowledge. With video evidence of her adultery, documented theft of marital assets, and proof of her support for Gerald's attempted murder, Vivian had no leverage to negotiate. She received minimal support, enough to survive, but never enough to live comfortably again. Mitchell and Elena, now fully understanding their mother's role in their family's destruction, chose to live with their father full-time. The court granted Damon sole custody of all 3 children, including baby Dominic, despite the boy's paternity. Vivian was granted supervised visitation for 2 hours every other weekend, but even that was contingent on her continued psychological evaluation and good behavior. The social destruction was even more complete. Every friend Vivian had cultivated during 16 years of marriage cut contact with her immediately after the gala. Charity organizations removed her from their boards. The country club revoked her membership. Her former social circle treated her as if she had died, erasing her completely from their lives and conversations. Financial devastation followed social exile. With her reputation destroyed, Vivian couldn't find employment in any field that required background checks or professional references. She worked part-time at a retail store, earning barely enough to pay rent and basic expenses. The designer clothes, luxury cars, and pampered lifestyle she'd enjoyed as Damon's wife became memories of a life she could never reclaim. But Damon's most elegant revenge involved Gerald's ultimate fate in prison. Using his business connections and understanding of how institutional power worked, Damon had ensured that Gerald's time behind bars would be particularly difficult. Gerald had been sent to Millbrook Correctional Facility, a medium-security prison 3 hours from the city. Through careful arrangement, he'd been placed in general population rather than protective custody, despite the nature of his crimes against children. His cellmate was Bruce Knox, a man serving 15 years for aggravated assault who had 3 young daughters and very strong opinions about people who hurt children. Gerald's professional arrogance and condescending attitude toward other inmates made him universally despised within the prison community. His attempts to establish himself as an educated man deserving respect were met with violence and humiliation. Within 6 months, Gerald had been hospitalized 3 times for injuries sustained in accidents that corrections officers seemed unable to prevent or investigate effectively. The commissary funds Vivian had been providing were cut off when her financial situation collapsed, leaving Gerald without the resources needed to buy protection or basic comforts. His letters to her went unanswered as she struggled with her own survival and had no money to maintain their correspondence. Dr. Joyce Atkins continued treating Mitchell and Elena, helping them process their feelings about their mother's betrayal while strengthening their relationship with their father. Both children thrived academically and socially. Their emotional stability restored once Gerald's manipulation was completely eliminated from their lives. Dominic, now approaching his first birthday, remained in Damon's care. Despite knowing the boy wasn't his biological son, Damon provided appropriate care and attention, though he maintained emotional distance. The child would grow up knowing who his real father was, but also understanding that Damon had chosen to raise him when that father attempted to murder him as an infant. 1 year after the gala, Damon received a letter from Gerald in prison. The man who had once carried himself with professional confidence and intellectual superiority now wrote in desperate, barely legible handwriting. Mr. Barlow, I know you arranged for my situation here. I'm writing to beg for your mercy. I made terrible mistakes, but I'm paying for them every day. Please consider my request for transfer to protective custody. I'm willing to sign away any rights to Dominic and never contact your family again. I just want to survive long enough to serve my sentence. Damon read the letter once, then fed it through his office shredder without responding. 2 weeks later, Gerald was found dead in his cell, apparently having hanged himself with bed sheets. The suicide note claimed he couldn't live with the guilt of what he'd attempted to do to an innocent child. Prison officials ruled it a suicide, though several inmates reported that Gerald had been receiving increasingly violent threats from other prisoners who had learned about his crimes. Vivian learned of Gerald's death through a brief news article. She attended his funeral alone, the only mourner besides his estranged family. As she stood beside his grave, she finally understood the complete scope of Damon's revenge. Gerald was dead, her life was destroyed, and there would be no recovery or second chances. 3 years after the events began, Damon stood in his office, looking out at the city skyline he had helped build. Mitchell, now 18, was preparing for college with plans to join the family business afterward. Elena, 16, excelled in academics and showed early signs of the intelligence and strength that would serve her well in life. Dominic, now 4, was a healthy, active child who called Damon Daddy and had no memory of his traumatic infancy. Vivian remained in her small apartment, working retail jobs and living paycheck to paycheck. Her attempts to rebuild her life were consistently thwarted by her reputation and criminal record. She would spend the rest of her life as a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying family loyalty. Damon had achieved complete victory. His enemies were destroyed, his children were thriving, and his business empire continued to grow. He had proven that betrayal carried consequences far beyond what most people could imagine, and that his mercy, once lost, could never be regained. The man who had built a construction empire through careful planning and ruthless execution had applied those same principles to personal justice. Vivian and Gerald had underestimated him, mistaking his love for weakness and his trust for naivety. They had learned, too late, that Damon Barlow was a man who neither forgave nor forgot. And in their complete destruction, he had sent a message that would echo through his family for generations. Loyalty was everything, and betrayal was unforgivable. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Hatred. Tyler Brooks had always known he was different from the silver spoon crowd his wife Amanda came from. While she grew up in the sprawling Grayson estate with servants and trust funds, Tyler had clawed his way up from a trailer park in Ohio. His mother, a factory worker, had died when he was 16, leaving him to fend for himself. He put himself through college with construction jobs and military service, earning every dollar through sweat and determination. That grit had caught Amanda's attention 8 years ago at a charity gala where Tyler was working security. She was 24 then, fresh out of college and rebelling against her father's expectations. Tyler, 26 and hardened by life, represented everything her sheltered world lacked: danger, authenticity, raw masculinity. Robert Grayson, Amanda's father and heir to a shipping fortune, had disapproved from day one. "You're marrying beneath yourself," Robert had told Amanda before their wedding. Tyler had overheard through the door of Robert's study. "That boy has nothing to offer except muscles and attitude." But Amanda had been defiant then, claiming she loved Tyler's strength and independence. They'd married despite Robert's threats to cut her off, though he'd eventually relented when their son Dylan was born. The old man was obsessed with legacy and bloodline. Having a grandson softened his stance toward Tyler, though barely. Tyler had spent 7 years building his construction business from nothing, taking on the most dangerous jobs, working 18-hour days. His company, Brooks Construction, now employed 40 men and had contracts worth millions. He'd proven himself in Robert's world, but it had never been enough. The old man still looked at him like dirt on his shoe. The marriage had been passionate at first. Amanda was drawn to Tyler's intensity, his refusal to bow to anyone. In bed, she craved his dominance, his ability to make her feel small and vulnerable in ways her privileged upbringing never had. But as the years passed and Tyler's business consumed more of his time, cracks began to show. Amanda started attending more social events alone, reconnecting with old friends from her elite circle. She complained about Tyler's long hours, his calloused hands, his preference for beer over wine. The woman who once found his roughness exciting now seemed embarrassed by it at dinner parties and charity functions. Tyler noticed, but said nothing. He'd learned early that words were worthless. Actions mattered. He continued building his empire, believing that success would eventually earn Robert's respect and secure his family's future. He loved Dylan fiercely and thought Amanda's complaints were just temporary frustration. He was wrong about many things, but never about the importance of loyalty. In Tyler's world, betrayal was the ultimate sin, punishable by complete destruction. His father had abandoned his mother when Tyler was 10, leaving them in poverty. Tyler had sworn he'd never forgive such weakness, such cowardice. That moral code would prove crucial in the storm to come. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The first real sign of trouble came 6 months before the inheritance announcement. Tyler had returned home early from a job site, his clothes covered in concrete dust, when he heard Amanda on the phone in her study. Her voice carried a tone he'd never heard before, intimate, conspiratorial. "I can't keep pretending much longer," she was saying. "Tyler suspects nothing, but Dylan is starting to ask questions about why I'm gone so much." Tyler had frozen outside the door, his hand on the knob. Through the crack, he could see Amanda pacing, one hand running through her blonde hair in a gesture he recognized as nervous excitement. "No, he's too focused on his business to notice anything else," she continued. "Besides, even if he did find out, what could he do? Father controls everything that matters in this town." The conversation had lasted another 10 minutes, filled with hushed promises and plans for secret meetings. Tyler had retreated to his workshop in the garage, his mind racing. The Amanda he'd married wouldn't have been capable of such deception, but people changed. Money and comfort had a way of corrupting even the strongest character. That night, he'd tested her, asking casual questions about her day, her plans for the weekend. She'd lied smoothly, mentioning book clubs and charity committees. Tyler had smiled and nodded, filing away every falsehood for future reference. Over the following weeks, Tyler began documenting Amanda's lies with methodical precision. He installed tracking software on her phone, small cameras in her car, and began following her occasionally. What he discovered made his blood run cold with rage. Amanda was having an affair with David Hensley, Robert's personal attorney and longtime family friend. Hensley was married with 2 teenage daughters, a pillar of the community who gave speeches about family values at the country club. The hypocrisy was staggering, but what truly enraged Tyler was the location of their meetings. They were using Dylan's bedroom in the old Grayson family cabin for their encounters, defiling the space where Tyler's son had played and slept during family visits. The thought of his wife and her lover rutting in his child's bed like animals filled Tyler with a murderous fury that took all his self-control to contain. But Tyler was a patient man when he needed to be. He'd learned in the military that emotion was the enemy of effective action. Instead of confronting them immediately, he began gathering evidence, planning his response with the same methodical approach he used for his most complex construction projects. He discovered that the affair had been going on for 2 years, starting shortly after Hensley's wife had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. Amanda and David had bonded over the burden of caring for broken people, as Tyler overheard in one recorded conversation. They spoke about Tyler and David's wife as obstacles to their happiness, inconveniences to be managed until they could be together openly. The depth of their callousness was breathtaking. Amanda complained about Tyler's crude behavior and embarrassing background, while David assured her that once his wife's condition worsened enough to require full-time care, they could begin planning their future together. They spoke about Dylan as a complication, discussing how to minimize Tyler's influence over his own son. Tyler began sleeping separately from Amanda, claiming work stress and early mornings. She seemed relieved rather than concerned, which told him everything he needed to know about the state of their marriage. But he continued playing the role of the oblivious husband, even as he planned their destruction with increasing detail. The ammunition he was gathering would be devastating when deployed correctly. But Tyler wanted more than just a divorce and custody battle. He wanted total victory, complete destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. For that, he would need to be patient a little longer. Chapter 3. The Moment of Truth. The day of Robert Grayson's inheritance announcement arrived with October rain hammering the windows of the family estate. Tyler had been summoned along with Amanda and Dylan for what Robert had cryptically called important family business. The old man's health had been declining rapidly over the past year, and Tyler suspected this was about end-of-life planning. The estate's main parlor was formal and intimidating, filled with dark mahogany furniture and oil paintings of long-dead Graysons. Robert sat behind his massive desk like a judge, with David Hensley standing beside him holding a leather portfolio. The sight of his wife's lover playing the role of trusted family advisor made Tyler's jaw clench, but he kept his expression neutral. Amanda sat with Dylan on the antique sofa, her hand resting possessively on their son's shoulder. She was dressed in a black dress that Tyler recognized as new and expensive, probably bought with money meant for Dylan's college fund. The thought of her using their son's future to impress her lover added another layer to Tyler's growing rage. "Tyler," Robert began, his voice carrying its usual note of barely concealed disdain, "I've asked you here because these decisions affect your son, though they don't directly concern you." Tyler nodded, saying nothing. He'd learned that Robert interpreted silence as weakness, which suited Tyler's current strategy perfectly. Robert gestured to David, who opened the portfolio with practiced efficiency. "I'm distributing my assets among family members," Robert continued. "Amanda will receive 40% of the business interests in the primary estate. My nephew Charles gets 30%, and the vacation properties in Aspen and Nantucket. Dylan will receive 20% in trust, managed by David until he turns 25. Tyler felt something cold settle in his stomach. And the remaining 10%. Robert's smile was cruel. That goes to David for his years of faithful service to this family. He's been more like a son to me than... The old man's eyes fixed on Tyler with unmistakable contempt. More than someone who married into the family for financial gain. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Tyler watched Amanda's face carefully, looking for any sign of surprise or objection. Instead, he saw only a slight nod, as if she'd expected this outcome. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She'd known about this beforehand. She'd probably helped plan it. Furthermore, Robert continued, his voice gaining strength as he delivered what he clearly considered a killing blow. Tyler will receive nothing. As I've always said, he's not really family. He's an outsider who happened to marry my daughter. Dylan, who had been quietly fidgeting beside his mother, suddenly stood up. The 9-year-old reached into his backpack and pulled out a manila folder that looked official and important. Tyler watched in amazement as his son walked directly to Robert's desk. "Grandma told me to give this to you if you ever excluded Dad again," Dylan announced with the simple clarity that only children possessed. Robert's face went from smug satisfaction to confusion as he took the folder. "What are you talking about, boy? Your grandmother has been dead for 3 years. She gave it to me before she got sick," Dylan explained. "She said it was important and that I should keep it safe until I needed it. She said you try to hurt Dad someday because you never understood what made people strong." Tyler watched his father-in-law's face transform as he opened the folder and began reading. Robert's usual ruddy complexion drained to ash gray, and his hands started trembling. David moved closer to read over his shoulder, and Tyler saw the lawyer's confident expression crumble into something approaching terror. "Where did you get this?" Robert whispered, his voice barely audible. Dylan shrugged with 9-year-old indifference. "Grandma's secret safe in her sewing room. She showed me how to open it and told me this was for Dad if you ever tried to be mean to him." Amanda leaned forward, her face showing the first sign of genuine concern Tyler had seen from her in months. "Daddy, what is it?" But Robert couldn't answer. He was staring at the documents in the folder as if they were a death sentence. David had gone completely pale and was backing away from the desk like he'd seen a ghost. Tyler remained seated, watching the drama unfold with growing fascination. Eleanor Grayson had died of cancer when Dylan was 6, but she'd been lucid and sharp until the very end. Tyler had always suspected she saw through her husband's business dealings more clearly than anyone realized. "Well," Tyler said finally, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Are you going to share what my son just delivered, or do I need to have my own lawyers examine it?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Robert looked up at Tyler with new eyes, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Whatever was in that folder had shifted the balance of power in the room completely. Tyler smiled slowly, showing teeth. For the first time since entering the Grayson family circle, he held all the cards. Chapter 4. Revelations and Recalculations. The silence in the parlor stretched until Robert finally spoke, his voice hollow and defeated. "Eleanor knew," he whispered. "She knew everything." Tyler rose from his chair and approached the desk with deliberate slowness. Up close, he could see sweat beading on Robert's forehead despite the October chill. "Knew what exactly?" David tried to intervene, his lawyer instincts kicking in despite his obvious panic. "Robert, don't say anything else. We need to review these documents privately and—" "Shut up, David," Tyler said without taking his eyes off his father-in-law. His voice carried a quiet menace that made both older men flinch. "I think we're past the point of legal maneuvering." Robert's hands shook as he spread the documents across his desk. Tyler could see bank statements, legal agreements, and what appeared to be correspondence dating back 15 years. His late mother-in-law had been thorough in her documentation. "The shipping business," Robert began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was never just shipping. We've been moving other things, taking payments from people who needed discreet transport services. Eleanor found out about the money laundering operation 5 years ago." Amanda gasped from the sofa, but Tyler felt only cold satisfaction. Eleanor Grayson had struck him as too intelligent and observant to be completely ignorant of her husband's activities. The old woman had been playing a longer game than anyone realized. But that's not the worst part, Robert continued, looking directly at Tyler with something approaching respect for the first time in 7 years. Eleanor discovered that I'd been skimming from Dylan's trust fund to pay for the operation. Your son's inheritance. I've been using it as collateral for illegal loans. The admission hit Tyler like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. His 9-year-old son had just unknowingly revealed that his grandfather was a criminal who'd been stealing his future. The poetic justice was almost overwhelming. David stepped forward desperately. Robert, please. We can fix this. The money can be replaced, and the other activities can be... Can be what? Tyler interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Covered up? Forgotten? You think I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that my son's college fund has been funding your criminal enterprise? He turned to Amanda, who was staring at her father with a mixture of shock and growing understanding. Did you know about any of this? Amanda's silence was answer enough. Tyler studied her face and saw not ignorance, but the careful calculation of someone trying to figure out how much damage control was needed. She'd known something, even if not the full extent. The trust fund can be restored, she said finally, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she used when trying to manipulate him. Daddy made mistakes, but family forgives family. We can work through this together. Tyler laughed, a sound devoid of humor that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Family? You mean the family that just declared I wasn't really part of it? The family that's been stealing from my son while treating me like hired help. Dylan, who had been watching the adult drama with wide eyes, spoke up from the sofa. Dad, are you mad at Grandpa? Tyler's expression softened as he looked at his son. I'm disappointed, Dylan. Very disappointed. But not in you. You did exactly what your grandmother asked you to do. He turned back to Robert and David, his face hardening again. Here's what's going to happen. First, you're going to transfer 51% ownership of all business assets to me, effective immediately. Consider compensation for the theft and years of disrespect. That's impossible, David protested. The business structure doesn't allow for. Then restructure it, Tyler snapped. You're a lawyer, aren't you? Find a way. Second, Dylan's trust fund will be restored with 20% interest, and control will transfer to me as his father. Robert found his voice again, some of his old arrogance returning. And if I refuse, you'll go to the authorities? Your son would lose everything if this business is destroyed. Tyler's smile was predatory. Who said anything about the authorities? I'm a construction worker, Robert. I know how to make problems disappear permanently. And unlike you, I don't leave evidence lying around for family members to find. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Tyler had learned violence in the military and refined it through years of dealing with difficult subcontractors and union disputes. Both Robert and David understood they were no longer dealing with a respectful son-in-law who had tolerated years of condescension. Amanda stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. Tyler, you can't threaten my father. This is still his house, his business. His criminal enterprise, Tyler corrected. And threatening? I'm simply explaining the natural consequences of betraying someone like me. Your father understands, don't you, Robert? Robert nodded slowly, finally recognizing the steel beneath Tyler's working-class exterior. Eleanor had seen it years ago and prepared accordingly. She'd known her husband would eventually push too far and had given her grandson the tools to protect his father. There's one more condition, Tyler added, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. David resigns from all positions related to this family and its business, effective immediately. His services are no longer required. David's face went white as he realized the implications. Without the Grayson account, his law practice would collapse within months. More importantly, his connection to Amanda would be severed permanently. Tyler glanced at his wife, who was staring at David with panic in her eyes. She was beginning to understand that her carefully constructed double life was crumbling around her. The game had changed completely, and Tyler was no longer playing defense. Chapter 5. The Web Titans. 3 days after the inheritance meeting, Tyler sat in his home office reviewing the legal documents that would transfer control of the Grayson Empire to him. David had been forced to draft the papers under threat of exposure, his hands shaking as he signed away everything Robert had spent decades building. But Tyler's real focus was on the evidence he'd been gathering about Amanda's betrayal. The folder from Eleanor had contained more than just proof of Robert's crimes. Hidden among the financial documents were photographs, Amanda and David at various hotels over the past 2 years, time-stamped and dated with Eleanor's meticulous handwriting. The old woman had been documenting the affair long before Tyler had discovered it, preparing for this moment with surgical precision. Tyler's phone buzzed with a text from one of his construction foremen. The message was simple, package delivered as requested. Tyler smiled grimly as he deleted the message. The first phase of his revenge was now in motion. Amanda entered the office without knocking, her face tight with stress. She'd been trying to reach David all morning, but Tyler had made sure the lawyer would be unavailable for the foreseeable future. David was currently dealing with a sudden inspection from the State Bar Association, triggered by an anonymous tip about ethical violations. The inspection would find exactly what Tyler had arranged for them to find. "We need to talk," Amanda said, closing the door behind her. She was wearing one of her designer outfits, but Tyler could see the strain around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought he wasn't looking. "About what?" Tyler asked without looking up from his papers. He wanted her to feel insignificant, unworthy of his full attention. "About what happened with my father. About the business transfer." She moved closer to his desk, her voice taking on the seductive tone she'd once used to manipulate him. "Tyler, I know we've had our problems, but we're still a team. We can use this opportunity to build something amazing together." Tyler finally looked up, his gray eyes cold and emotionless. "We? There is no we, Amanda. There's me, cleaning up the mess your family created, and there's you, pretending you didn't know about any of it." Amanda's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculation beneath. "What do you mean by that?" Instead of answering, Tyler opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her. The video showed Amanda and David in what appeared to be Dylan's bedroom at the family cabin, their bodies intertwined on the small bed where Tyler's son had once slept peacefully. Amanda's face went white as she recognized the footage. "Where did you get this?" "I've been documenting your activities for months," Tyler said matter-of-factly. Eleanor wasn't the only one preparing for this moment. "The question is, what were you planning to do after you and David destroyed my family?" The video continued playing, showing intimate moments between Amanda and her lover, their whispered conversations about getting rid of Tyler and taking Dylan away from his corrupting influence. Tyler watched his wife's face crumble as she realized how thoroughly she'd been exposed. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, the lie automatic and pathetic. Tyler stood up slowly, his 6'2" frame towering over her. "It's exactly what it looks like. You've been planning to take my son away from me while stealing everything I've worked for. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was that weak?" Amanda backed toward the door, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Tyler, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but I love you. I love our family. Love." Tyler's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You love your father's money and David's promises about your future together. You love the idea of being wealthy without having to work for it. But you've never loved me, and you sure as hell don't love Dylan enough to protect him from your selfishness." He moved around the desk, backing her against the door. "Here's what's going to happen, Amanda. You're going to pack your things and leave this house tonight. You'll take nothing except the clothes you can carry, and you'll never contact Dylan without my permission." "You can't take my son away from me," she protested, her voice rising with panic. "I'm his mother. I have rights." Tyler's smile was predatory. "Rights? You mean like the right to commit adultery in your child's bed? Like the right to plan his kidnapping with your lover? I have hours of video and audio recordings that show exactly what kind of mother you really are." He opened another file on his laptop, showing bank records of Amanda's secret credit cards and hidden accounts. "I also have evidence of the money you've been stealing from our joint accounts to fund your affair. David's hotel bills, your jewelry purchases, Even the abortion you had 6 months ago when you thought the baby might not be mine. Amanda's knees nearly buckled. The abortion had been her deepest secret, the moment when she'd chosen her affair over any possibility of rebuilding her marriage. Tyler had known all along, had been planning this confrontation with methodical precision. "Get out," Tyler said quietly. "Get out before I do something we'll both regret." Amanda fumbled for the door handle, tears streaming down her face. "What about David? What did you do to him?" Tyler's expression didn't change. "David is learning that there are consequences for betraying the wrong person. By tomorrow morning, he'll be disbarred, divorced, and financially ruined. His wife deserves better than a cheating husband, don't you think?" As Amanda fled the room, Tyler returned to his desk and opened another file on his computer. Phase 1 was complete. Amanda was out of his house, and David was neutralized. But Phase 2 would be even more satisfying. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized weeks ago. When the voice answered, Tyler's smile was cold and calculating. "It's time," he said simply. "Execute Phase 2. Chapter 6. Checkmate." The next morning brought news that spread through the elite social circles like wildfire. David Hensley had been found in his office at 3 a.m., frantically shredding documents and trying to transfer money to offshore accounts. Unfortunately for him, federal agents had been waiting in his office since midnight, alerted by an anonymous tip about money laundering activities connected to the Grayson shipping business. Tyler watched the news coverage from his construction site office, Dylan sitting beside him eating breakfast before school. His son seemed remarkably unaffected by his mother's sudden departure, which told Tyler everything he needed to know about Amanda's level of involvement in Dylan's life. "Dad," Dylan said between bites of cereal, "is Mom coming back?" Tyler studied his son's face, looking for signs of distress or confusion. Instead, he saw the same clear-eyed intelligence that Eleanor Grayson had possessed. "Do you want her to come back?" Dylan considered the question seriously. "I don't know. She's been sad a lot lately, and she gets angry when you're not around. Maybe she needs to figure out how to be happy again." The wisdom in his 9-year-old son's words struck Tyler like a physical blow. Dylan had been watching his parents' marriage disintegrate and had somehow understood that his mother's unhappiness was destroying their family. Eleanor had chosen her ally well. Tyler's phone buzzed with a call from his lawyer. The federal investigation into the Grayson shipping business had moved with unusual speed, suggesting that someone had provided law enforcement with detailed evidence and documentation. Robert would be arrested within hours, his empire crumbling as investigators froze assets and seized records. But Tyler's revenge was far from complete. He'd spent weeks setting up the next phase, using his construction company's resources and connections to ensure maximum damage to everyone who had betrayed him. Amanda appeared at the construction site just after noon, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and desperate. She'd been staying in a cheap motel since leaving the house, her credit cards frozen by federal investigators looking into the money laundering operation. Tyler watched her approach through his office window, noting the way his workers stopped what they were doing to stare at the clearly out-of-place woman in designer clothes. "Tyler, please," she begged when he finally allowed her into his office. "David's been arrested, Daddy's going to prison, and the lawyers say I might be charged as an accessory. You have to help me. I'm Dylan's mother." Tyler leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same cold assessment he'd use on a building foundation that was about to collapse. "Help you? After everything you've done?" "I know I made mistakes," Amanda continued, desperation making her voice shrill. "But I was confused, lonely. You were never home, always working. David offered me attention, made me feel special. It didn't mean anything." "It meant everything," Tyler corrected. "It meant you were willing to destroy our family for a few moments of feeling special. It meant you were willing to let your father steal from our son while you played house with another man." He stood up and moved to the window, looking out at his construction crew. These were honest men who worked hard for their families, who understood loyalty and commitment. "You want to know the difference between you and them? They know what they have, and they protect it. You threw away everything real for something fake." Amanda moved closer, her hand reaching for his arm. "Tyler, I'm begging you. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll sign any papers you want, give you full custody, anything. Just don't let them destroy me completely. Tyler turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Destroy you? Amanda, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure there were consequences. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. Your divorce papers. I'm offering you a choice. Sign them now and walk away with a small settlement. Or fight me in court and lose everything while the federal investigation expands to include your role in the money laundering. Amanda's face crumbled as she realized the extent of Tyler's planning. You orchestrated all of this. The investigation, David's arrest, everything. I provided law enforcement with evidence of crimes that were actually committed, Tyler clarified. Your father chose to become a criminal. David chose to help him. You chose to betray your family. I just made sure the truth came to light. 2 years had passed since Tyler's divorce, and Dylan was thriving in his new life. The 11-year-old had grown taller and stronger, showing early signs of inheriting his father's physical presence and mental toughness. His grades were excellent, his friendships healthy, and his relationship with Tyler had deepened into something approaching genuine partnership. Amanda, meanwhile, had descended into a spiral of poverty and desperation that Tyler monitored with clinical detachment. She'd been forced to declare bankruptcy after failing to find stable employment. Her reputation in the business community thoroughly destroyed by Tyler's methodical campaign. She was currently working night shifts at a factory outside the city, living in a studio apartment that Tyler's investigators described as barely habitable. Tyler felt no sympathy for her suffering. In his worldview, consequences were earned through choices, and Amanda was simply experiencing the natural result of her betrayal. But Tyler wasn't satisfied with her mere poverty. He wanted her complete destruction, the kind of total defeat that would serve as a permanent reminder of what happened to those who crossed him. The opportunity for final revenge came through an unexpected source, David Hensley's ex-wife, Patricia. The woman had contacted Tyler through his lawyer, requesting a private meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest. Tyler agreed, curious about what the disgraced attorney's former wife might want from him. Patricia Hensley was a refined woman in her late 40s, her graying hair styled elegantly despite the obvious financial strain of her divorce. She met Tyler at an upscale restaurant, her nervous energy suggesting she was about to propose something significant. Mr. Brooks, she began after they'd ordered, I want to thank you for what you did to my husband. I know that sounds strange, but discovering David's affair was actually a blessing. It freed me from a marriage that had been a lie for years. Tyler studied her carefully, noting the intelligence in her eyes and the steel beneath her polite demeanor. What do you want, Mrs. Hensley? It's Patricia now. I've taken back my maiden name. And what I want is justice for both of us. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. David has been writing letters to Amanda from prison. Love letters, promising her that he'll wait for her, that they'll be together when he gets out. Tyler felt his jaw tighten. The idea of David and Amanda maintaining their relationship despite everything that had happened was intolerable. How do you know about the letters? Because I still receive his legal correspondence. We're not divorced yet, just separated pending the completion of his sentence. The prison officials copy me on everything he sends or receives. Patricia smiled coldly. David thinks he's been clever, but I've been documenting every communication. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. Copies of every letter he's sent to Amanda over the past 18 months. They discuss plans for when he's released, where they'll live, how they'll start over together. But more importantly, they discuss Dylan. Tyler's blood ran cold. What about Dylan? They plan to take him, Patricia said quietly. Not kidnapping, exactly, but they want to convince him that you're the villain who destroyed his family. David has been researching ways to challenge your custody, claiming that your methods of obtaining the divorce were illegal or coercive. The envelope felt heavy in Tyler's hands as he opened it and began reading. David's handwriting was precise and lawyerly, but the emotions behind the words were clear. He genuinely believed he and Amanda were victims of Tyler's vindictive persecution, and he was planning to help her reclaim her son once his sentence was complete. Why are you showing me this? Tyler asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Because I want David to suffer the way I suffered when I discovered his betrayal, Patricia replied, her voice hardening. He destroyed our family for a fantasy, and I want that fantasy to become a nightmare. Will you help me? Tyler studied the woman across from him, recognizing a kindred spirit in her desire for complete revenge. What did you have in mind? Patricia's smile was predatory. David gets out in 5 years. Amanda is barely surviving on her current salary, but she's holding on to hope that David will save her when he's released. What if we made sure that hope turned into the most devastating disappointment possible? She outlined her plan with the precision of someone who had been thinking about revenge for months. Tyler would use his connections to monitor Amanda's communications and movements, while Patricia would feed David false information about Amanda's loyalty and devotion. When David was finally released, he would discover that the woman he'd been dreaming about had moved on completely, leaving him with nothing. But the real blow, Patricia continued, will be when David realizes that Amanda never loved him at all. She was using him to get access to family money and social status. When those things disappeared, so did her interest in him. Tyler considered the proposal carefully. It was elaborate, requiring years of careful manipulation, but the psychological impact would be devastating. David would lose not only his freedom and career, but also his faith in the one relationship he believed had made his sacrifices worthwhile. There's one modification I'd like to make, Tyler said finally. Dylan needs to understand who his mother really is, not just that she chose poorly. I want him to see the evidence of her manipulation and selfishness so he never doubts that I made the right choice in protecting him. Patricia nodded approvingly. A son should know the truth about his parents. David's daughters certainly learned the truth about their father. They shook hands across the table, sealing an alliance built on mutual desire for complete destruction of their betrayers. Tyler felt a familiar sense of satisfaction as he imagined David's face when he finally understood that his 5-year sentence had been only the beginning of his punishment. Tyler Brooks had built his life on the principle that betrayal demanded absolute consequences. Now, he had a partner who understood that principle just as clearly as he did. Chapter 9. Perfect Justice. 5 years later, Tyler stood in the main office of Brooks Industries, the empire he'd built from the ruins of the Grayson shipping business. Dylan, now 16 and nearly as tall as his father, was reviewing college applications at the conference table. The boy had inherited Tyler's work ethic and intelligence, earning straight A's while also excelling in athletics and leadership activities. The final phase of Tyler's revenge was reaching its conclusion. David Hensley had been released from prison 6 months ago, emerging to discover that the world he'd left behind had been completely transformed. His law license was permanently revoked, his assets seized, and his reputation destroyed beyond repair. More devastatingly, Amanda was gone. Patricia Hensley had executed her part of their plan with artistic precision. Through careful manipulation of David's correspondence and strategic leaks of information, she'd convinced the imprisoned attorney that Amanda was waiting faithfully for his return. David had spent 5 years writing love letters to a woman who had stopped reading them after the first year. She reached for the envelope with shaking hands, scanning the divorce settlement terms. Tyler was offering her $50,000 and her personal belongings, a fraction of what she might have claimed in a normal divorce, but more than she'd have after legal fees and potential criminal charges. If I sign this, what happens to Dylan? Tyler's expression softened slightly when he mentioned his son. Dylan stays with me. You can have supervised visitation once a month, assuming you stay out of trouble and prove you can be stable. He deserves better than watching his mother chase after men who make empty promises. Amanda signed the papers with tears streaming down her face, her designer pen scratching across the documents that ended her marriage and sealed her fate. Tyler watched without emotion, feeling only the cold satisfaction of a job completed thoroughly. As she prepared to leave, Amanda turned back one final time. What if I had chosen differently? What if I had ended the affair and tried to save our marriage? Tyler considered the question seriously. Then we wouldn't be here. But you didn't choose differently, Amanda. You chose to betray the people who loved you most. That choice has consequences. After she left, Tyler called Dylan's school to arrange early pickup. His son deserved to hear about the divorce from his father, not from playground gossip or news reports. As he drove to the school, Tyler felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. The war was over, and he had won completely. Chapter 7. Rebuilding from Ashes. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Tyler stood in the master bedroom of what had once been the Grayson estate, now legally his property through the business acquisition. The federal investigation had resulted in Robert receiving a 15-year sentence for money laundering and tax evasion. David had plea bargained for 7 years in exchange for his testimony, his law practice destroyed, and his wife successfully filing for divorce with evidence of his infidelity. Dylan was adjusting well to their new living situation, though Tyler had been careful to remove any reminders of the room's previous owners. The boy had started therapy to help process his parents' divorce, but he seemed remarkably resilient. His relationship with Tyler had grown stronger through the ordeal, built on honesty and mutual respect rather than the conditional love he'd received from his mother and grandfather. Amanda had violated the terms of their divorce agreement within 3 months, attempting to contact Dylan directly through social media and trying to turn him against Tyler with sob stories about how his father had ruined her life. Tyler had responded by having her supervised visitation rights revoked entirely, a decision the family court judge supported after reviewing the evidence of her continued manipulation attempts. Tyler's construction business had expanded rapidly with the addition of the shipping company's legitimate assets. He'd sold off the properties connected to illegal activities and used the proceeds to establish a college fund for Dylan that dwarfed what Robert had originally intended. More importantly, Tyler had complete control over every aspect of his and his son's lives for the first time since his marriage began. But Tyler wasn't finished with his revenge. Amanda had found work as a real estate agent in a neighboring city, trying to rebuild her life with a modest apartment and a 10-year-old sedan. She'd attempted to date several men, but Tyler's reputation and connections in the business community made it difficult for her to find anyone willing to risk association with the ex-wife of someone known for his ruthless response to betrayal. Tyler had been patient, but tonight marked the completion of the final phase of his plan. He discovered that Amanda was planning to leave the state, taking a job offer in California where she hoped to start fresh. Tyler couldn't allow her to escape the consequences of her actions so easily. His phone buzzed with a text message, "Package delivered as requested." Tyler smiled as he read the words, knowing that Amanda was about to discover that geography wouldn't protect her from the reputation she'd earned. The package was a comprehensive dossier that Tyler's private investigator had delivered to Amanda's new employer, a detailed account of her role in her family's criminal enterprise, her affair that destroyed her marriage, and her subsequent attempts to manipulate her own child against his father. The California real estate firm would withdraw their job offer by morning, and Amanda's references would ensure that no reputable company would hire her in the future. Tyler had also arranged for Amanda's landlord to receive evidence of her mounting debts and unstable employment history. Her lease would be terminated within the week, forcing her back to staying in cheap motels while she searched for work that would never materialize. Dylan entered the master bedroom, carrying his homework and settling into the reading chair by the window. Tyler had made sure his son felt comfortable in every room of their new home, erasing the memories of his grandfather's dominance and his mother's betrayal. "Dad," Dylan said, looking up from his math problems, "Mrs. Peterson at school asked if I miss Mom. I told her I missed the mom I thought I had, but not the mom she really was. Was that okay to say?" Tyler set down the business documents he'd been reviewing and moved to sit on the edge of the chair. His son's emotional intelligence continued to amaze him, the boy's ability to articulate complex feelings with simple honesty. "That was very wise," Tyler said seriously. "People change, and sometimes we have to accept that the person we loved isn't the person they became. It's okay to miss what we thought we had while being glad we don't have to live with the reality." Dylan nodded and returned to his homework, the conversation complete in the way that only children could manage. Tyler watched his son work, feeling a fierce protectiveness that burned like fire in his chest. Anyone who threatened Dylan's happiness or security would face the same methodical destruction that Tyler had visited upon Amanda, David, and Robert. Tyler's phone rang with a call from his foreman. The latest construction project was ahead of schedule and under budget, a testament to the quality of work that Tyler demanded from his crews. Success was the best revenge against those who had dismissed him as unworthy, but it was also the foundation for the empire he was building for Dylan's future. As he discussed project details with his foreman, Tyler caught sight of himself in the bedroom mirror. The man looking back was harder than the one who had married Amanda 8 years ago, scarred by betrayal but strengthened by victory. He'd learned that mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford when it came to protecting his family. The phone call ended, and Tyler returned to his documents. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he was content to sit with his son in the house that had once belonged to his enemies, planning the future he'd built from the ashes of their destruction. Tyler Brooks had never been one to forgive or forget, and tonight that fact brought him complete peace. Chapter 8. The Hunter's Patience. Tyler had arranged for Amanda to meet Marcus Webb, a wealthy widower who owned a chain of restaurants in Arizona. Marcus was lonely, generous, and completely unaware of Amanda's history. Tyler had made sure Amanda appeared to be a charming divorcee looking for a fresh start, and the relationship had developed exactly as Tyler had predicted. Amanda had married Marcus within 18 months and moved to Phoenix, where she was now living the comfortable lifestyle she'd always craved. She rarely mentioned her first marriage or her son, telling Marcus only that her ex-husband had been controlling and that custody issues made contact with Dylan complicated. Dylan knew the truth about his mother's new life through private investigators Tyler employed to monitor the situation. The teenager had processed the information with the same clear-eyed pragmatism he'd shown as a child, understanding that his mother had chosen wealth and comfort over any relationship with her son. "She's not a bad person," Dylan had told Tyler after learning about Amanda's remarriage. "She's just weak. She needs someone to take care of her, and Marcus does that better than you ever could. It's probably better for everyone." Tyler was proud of his son's emotional maturity, though he suspected Dylan had inherited Eleanor Grayson's ability to see through people's pretenses. The boy understood that his mother was fundamentally selfish, choosing the path of least resistance regardless of who got hurt. David's release from prison had been carefully orchestrated to maximize his psychological destruction. Tyler had arranged for him to be picked up by a private investigator who delivered the news about Amanda's remarriage along with photographs of her new life. David's reaction had been captured on video, complete emotional collapse as he realized that his 5-year sacrifice had been for nothing. Patricia had been waiting at David's apartment when he arrived, serving him with final divorce papers and eviction notices. She'd spent the prison years rebuilding her life and moving their daughters across the country, ensuring that David would have no family connections to sustain him through his downfall. "He's currently living in a homeless shelter downtown," Patricia reported during her final meeting with Tyler. "He applied for work at several factories and grocery stores, but his criminal record makes him unemployable for anything except manual labor. His daughters have refused all contact, and his former law partners won't return his calls." Tyler felt the deep satisfaction of a plan executed to perfection. David had lost everything: his career, his family, his freedom, and finally his hope. The man who had helped destroy Tyler's marriage was now experiencing the same isolation and desperation that Tyler had once felt, but without the strength and resources to fight back. "Dad," Dylan said from the conference table, looking up from his college applications, "I got into Stanford early admission." Tyler smiled, feeling genuine pride in his son's accomplishments. Dylan had earned this success through his own effort and intelligence, building on the foundation Tyler had provided, but creating his own path forward. "That's excellent news. Are you sure that's where you want to go?" Dylan nodded confidently. "I want to study business and engineering, maybe take over the company someday. But I also want to understand how people like Grandpa and David justify their choices to themselves. Psychology might be useful for recognizing threats before they become problems." Tyler felt a chill of recognition as he heard his own strategic thinking reflected in his son's words. Dylan was becoming the kind of man who could protect himself and his family from betrayal, someone who understood that forgiveness was often just another word for weakness. "What about your mother?" Tyler asked carefully. "Do you want to reach out to her about college? Maybe let her know about Stanford?" Dylan considered the question seriously before shaking his head. "She made her choice when she picked Marcus over staying connected to me. I don't need her approval or her money. Besides, she might try to use my success to make herself look good to her new family." Tyler nodded approvingly. His son had learned the most important lesson of all, that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Dylan would be generous and loyal to those who earned it, but ruthless toward anyone who betrayed him. As the sun set over the city Tyler now dominated, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Robert Grayson was serving the final years of his sentence, broken by the loss of everything he'd built. David Hensley was homeless and hopeless, destroyed by his own choices and Tyler's patient revenge. Amanda had gotten what she'd always wanted, a wealthy husband and comfortable life, but at the cost of losing her son forever. Tyler had won completely, but more importantly, he'd built something lasting. Brooks Industries would provide Dylan with the resources and power to protect himself against future threats. The lessons Tyler had learned through betrayal and revenge would ensure that his son never suffered the same vulnerabilities. Tyler Brooks had never learned to forgive, and he never would. In his experience, forgiveness was what weak people called their inability to demand justice. He'd chosen a different path, one that led to complete victory over everyone who had ever underestimated him. As Dylan gathered his college applications and headed upstairs to his room, Tyler remained in the office, planning the next phase of his empire's expansion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he was content with the knowledge that he'd built a legacy that would protect his family